Well, our second reading this morning comes from later in Mark, chapter 15, verses 1 through 15. As soon as it was morning, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council. They bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" He answered him, "You say so." Then the chief priests accused him of many things. Pilate asked him again, "Have you no answer? See how many charges they bring against you?" But Jesus made no further reply, so that Pilate was amazed. Now at the festival, he used to release a prisoner for them, anyone for whom they asked. Now a man named Barabbas was in prison with the rebels who had committed murder during the insurrection. So the crowd came and began to ask Pilate to do for them according to his custom. Then he answered them, "Do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews?" For he realized that it was out of jealousy that the chief priests had handed him over. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have him release Barabbas instead. Pilate spoke to them again. "Then what do you wish me to do with the man you call king of the Jews?" They shouted back, "Crucify him." Pilate asked him, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Crucify him." So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released Barabbas for them, and after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified. Thus ends the reading. We call this Palm Sunday. Jesus' followers laid branches as a red carpet treatment on his route entering Jerusalem one last time. We call this Passion Sunday also because it begins Jesus' final days when his prophetic call to faithfulness puts him on a collision course with local government, religious elites, and imperial Rome. This collision course leads to Jesus' execution on a cross. Our basic instincts move us to avoid collision courses. Like when Deborah and I venture out onto rather huge Great Lake, Ontario, which is the smallest of the Great Lakes, but it doesn't look small to us in our comparatively tiny sailboat. We try to avoid a collision course because it's literally our survival. Although sailboats have the quote-unquote right-of-way to powerboats, when one sees a 200-foot cement ship moving at 3 times our speed, you avoid a collision course like we did with the picture we showed, and that happened just a couple of years ago. We did read 2 readings from Mark today, and thank you, Lila, for the great job you did reading that, because on this Sunday, we celebrate both the Palms and the Passion in the story. It is tempting to jump straight from a happy parade of palms to a happy ending of Easter sunrise. But it's in what happens between these 2 Sundays that gives Jesus' story its power today. It is during this week that Jesus set a collision course between his own peace, compassion, simple spirituality, and the Roman Empire's merciless war machine and cynical politics, as well as the religious empire's hypocrisy and greed. It was inevitable that when these opposites collided, good versus evil, that things would shatter and people would die. None of the characters in this collision, except Jesus, could guess the ultimate outcome. The main characters in this collision stand in contrast to each other. Pontius Pilate, High Priest Caiaphas, and of course, Jesus. Of course, first, Pontius Pilate. We have seen so many great actors portray him in films and maybe on stage. Pilate, historically, was the 5th Roman governor of Judea. He set his collision course as the absolute power and authority of the Roman Empire. Pilate's course into Jerusalem came from the west, from the Mediterranean seaport of Caesarea Maritimus. This was an artificially engineered seaport. It was constructed by none other than King Herod. Herod had used the new Roman technology of submersible concrete, where barges were sunk to create a harbor for Rome's ships. I mean, Herod was no fool. Rome is supreme, so he curried favor with Rome. Roman governors tended to stay there by the sea, in the cool breezes, instead of in the hot, dusty inland Jerusalem. But at strategic times, like at the festival of Passover, Governor Pilate knew he had to impress the masses with Rome's mighty presence, lest there be more instability or insurrection. So Pilate marches from the sea to Jerusalem. When Pilate arrives with his legions and chariots and spears and swords and probably a powerful war stallion, he came through grand western gates into the city. His collision course is aimed eastward. Now, in Jerusalem is the second character who has a collision course, Caiaphas, the high priest. Caiaphas is a symbol of King Herod's collusion with Rome and of the religious elite class collusion with Herod. There was a taxation stream that came straight through the Jerusalem temple. The religious elites, like priests and scribes and Herod's family, all benefited from this. There's wonderful detail about this in the book The Last Week by Marcus Borg and Professor Crossan. The annual temple tax levied on all Jewish males paid all of their salaries. Plus, part of that taxation money was paid as tribute to Rome, and all of it was collected through the temple. So there was a tremendous amount of collusion. Caiaphas, and we have a painting from the Renaissance that shows Caiaphas tearing his gown because of something Jesus said, but he got to live in a lavish apartment, just a short walk across a pedestrian bridge to where he brought Jesus before him for trial. That was his collision course, privileged above it all. Because in Jesus' time, there were these lovely urban apartments, and they were connected to the temple by these pedestrian highways above the fray. So they could go straight from the apartment to the temple, and the elite priests never had to mix with the unclean, common people. High priests were appointed by Herod, the puppet king, and each had to have Roman approval. And usually their terms were short, because if they weren't completely compliant, they would be removed. It's akin to the quasi-democracy China has set up with Hong Kong. The leaders there are quote-unquote elected, but they have to be totally compliant. Same deal in ancient Jerusalem. Caiaphas, by contrast, managed to stay in office for 18 years because he was in total collusion with Herod and Rome. He was their man inside the temple. Herod's collision course was selling out his religion for wealth and privilege. When Jesus famously tipped over the money tables in the temple, that great theatrical moment, he was not rejecting Jewish law. He was confronting the power-sharing deals and the hypocrisy of the religious power elites and all that they had with Herod and with Rome. And of course, the final character in this collision course is Jesus entering Jerusalem. The timing and symbolism make perfect sense when you think about it. Roman power enters from the western gates. chief priest Caiaphas enters through the inner gates to the temple for Passover week. But Jesus enters the prophet's gate, as it was called, at the same time, only from the east. He's both fulfilling Zechariah's prophecy, riding a lowly donkey into Jerusalem, and contrasting his entry with the powerful war stallion and chariot from Rome. Jesus' power is rooted instead in the divine compassion he embodies. His love of the poor and peasant folk, his outreach to the outcast, his calls for justice, his humble bearing and simple spirituality, these all put him at odds with imperial Rome's ruthless power and on a collision course with a religion that's become subservient to wealth and power. Jesus' arrival confronts both of these destructive forces at once. Jesus' course of movement, riding on the symbol of a donkey, is a movement of power of divine compassion made human in himself. Many of us have set a course and marched for important causes like safer gun laws, or for the earth, or for racial justice. Many of us have done that just in these last few years, or have done it over decades, over and over again. This week and beyond, the question for us is, will we follow Jesus' course of compassion and justice, even if it's a collision course? Will we allow divine compassion through the gates of our own hearts to make us, each of us, conduits of divine caring? Do we dare to be on a collision course against the powers of corrupt empire, but instead with the healing power of divine love empowering us? Can we oppose someone's actions and opinions without vilifying them or seeing them as enemy? Let's take some time this week that leads up to Easter, and let's intentionally open ourselves to how our Maker sees and loves people. And then let's care enough to challenge what might be oppressing them and to affirm what good is in them. That is what Jesus did. On Monday, Thursday, you could even join us online for more of his story. So let's set our course aligned with the compassion one, the one who is compassion, who guides us on a path to move ourselves and to move the world with loving grace and ultimate hope. Amen.